Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? Good, good. Good to see you guys here in the room this morning. Great to have you joining us online out there this morning. Thanks for joining us here at Life Church. We're looking forward to this morning and the things we get to do together here today. We have a great service planned for us all, and so thanks for taking time out of your week, or the beginning of your week, to hang out with us here. As always, just encourage you to take a moment to fill out our digital connection card, which you can find in our app, our Life Church app. And if you don't have the app, you can just find that on any app store. Just search Life Church Lancaster, and it'll be right there at the top. And so we'd love to know that you're here. Those in the room, those watching online, even if you're watching this next Thursday, that would be awesome if you would just take a minute to fill out that digital connection card, and we know who's engaging with us here. So we got a great morning plan. We're in part 3 of our teaching series, Breathe. I'm going to be talking about the soul and nature. So that's kind of our theme today. I'm pretty excited about talking about that if you haven't figured that out yet. But anyway, we're so glad that you're with us. And the band is going to lead us in a couple of songs. I think they've done a great job pulling some songs together to help us kind of think through these themes around nature and God. So I am going to stop talking, and I'm going to pass it over to the band. So take it away, guys.
Good morning, Life Church. Oh, okay. Good morning, Life Church. All right. If you feel so inclined, you can stand and sing with us. You can close your eyes. You can raise your hand. You can do whatever you are led to do, because today we are coming to be in the presence of the God of nature.
Fleshed out the wonder of life, and as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. Don't speak in vain, no syllable empty your voice. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath. worship so alive. If the mountains bow in reverence so alive. If the oceans roar your greatness so alive. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of creation, you chased down my heart through all of my failures and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. When you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I can see your heart and everything you've done. Every part designed, a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind. Think of the power in those words. You're the one who never leaves one behind. You would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? Your desire for us to be in presence with you. You are the God of promises. Great is your faithfulness to me. God of Abraham, you're the God of covenant, of faithful promises. Time and time again, you have proven you do just what you say. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it'll come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness. to age, till the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. History can prove there's nothing you can't do. You're faithful and true. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it'll come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Oh, your I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. He'll never let me down. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness. Can I get an amen? Great is your faithfulness, Lord. We shout that today and every day, and we praise your name. You bring life to the barren places, light to the darkest spaces, God. It's your nature. You bring joy to the broken-hearted, hope to the ones you've lost it, God. It's your nature. There is no desert that your streams can run to. There are no ruins that your love won't make new. You tell the wasteland that it will bloom again, 'cause it's your nature. You will restore the years that shame has stolen. You keep the promises that you have spoken. I know this wasteland will be whole again, 'cause it's your nature. You bring peace to the war inside us, and the fear is silenced, God. It's your nature. You bring joy to the broken-hearted, hope to the ones who've lost their God. It's your nature. There is no desert that your streams can't run to. There are no ruins that your love won't make new. You tell the wasteland that it will bloom again, 'cause it's your nature. You will restore the years that shame has stolen. You keep the promises that you have spoken. I know this wasteland, it will be whole again, 'cause it's your nature. Sing out, oh barren woman, sing out, oh broken man. Stretch out your hands, believing this is your promised land. Break out of disappointment, break out of hopelessness. Stretch out your hands, believing this is your promised land. Sing out, oh barren woman, sing out, oh broken man. Stretch out your hands, believing this is your promised land. Break out of disappointment, break out of hopelessness. Stretch out your hands, believing this is your promised land. There is no desert that your streams can run to. There are no ruins that your love won't make new. You tell the wasteland that it will bloom again, 'cause it's your nature. You will restore the years that shame has stolen. You keep the promises that you have spoken. I know this wasteland will be whole again, 'cause it's your nature. There is no desert that your streams can run to. There are no ruins that your love won't make new. You tell the wasteland that it will bloom again, 'cause it's your nature. You will restore the years that shame has stolen. You keep the promises that you have spoken. I know this wasteland will be whole again, 'cause it's your nature. It's your nature, Lord. We are yours. There is no desert that your streams can run to. There are no ruins that your love can't make new. You tell the wasteland, you and only you tell the wasteland that it will bloom again, because it's your nature. We thank you, we love you, we praise you. Be with us today and every day in your beautiful nature and your beautiful love. Amen.
All right. Well, thanks for that. That was really, really fantastic. Hopefully you enjoyed some of that singing today. Glad we can do this together as we worship together here at Life Church. So once again, thank you to those who are in the room. Good to see you. And those who are watching online, good to see you too. My name is Jason. I get to be the pastor here at Life Church. We're just so glad that you are hanging out with us here today. And Life Church exists with one hope and one goal in mind, and that's to help lead people to Jesus for life. We want to connect you to Jesus in a true and real and meaningful way. And so we pray that every time we get together, wherever you're at on your spiritual journey. If you're struggling, if you're exploring, if you are kind of falling away in some way or another and looking for ways to kind of grasp and stay engaged, or maybe you're just kind of skeptical about Christianity and checking things out, or maybe you're just all in. Wherever you're at on that journey, we're glad you're here, and we hope that today is helpful to you on that path. So, as always, I want to encourage you to take a minute to fill out that digital connection card that you can find in our Life Church app. That's a way we can stay connected with you. We know you're here. We know you're engaging. You can ask questions. Let us know any other information on there. But you can find that in our app, which we kind of remind you each week. You can get that in any app store. And that's a great way to just stay connected, to stay engaged with what's going on here. I'm going to mention more about it in just a second. Also want to just say, I want to also remind us about where we're at in this whole journey with the CDC and the coronavirus and all of that. We continue to just work to try to stay in step with what the CDC is recommending and what Pennsylvania Department of Health is recommending. And so those of you who are vaccinated, we say, hey, that's fine. It's time we can remove our masks. And those who maybe not vaccinated yet, the CD is saying that still masks should be required for folks like that. And so that's where we're at on this journey. If you're ever kind of wondering where we're at, just kind of remind yourself of what the CDC is saying. We're trying to stay in step with that. If you're wondering about our kids programming, that's a little bit more complex, and there's information in the app, and you can go to the app and click on our family ministries, and they let you know what's happening there and what we're doing with masks and social distancing and all of that stuff through our kids programming. So that's that. Also want to say a big thanks and appreciation to those who invest financially here at Life Church. What we do because people believe in this and what we're doing, and they invest financially here. So many of you are engaged in that and doing that, so thank you for that. If you're curious about ways to give, there's a lot of different methods in which you can make a donation. Go to the app right there in the home page. There's this thing that says how to give, and that'll kind of bring you up to speed on all the different ways to do that. Now, a lot I'm talking about today. So a couple other things I want to mention to you. So we're doing some hikes this summer. One of the things with Life Church right now, and probably all churches and community, we don't even know who's a part of our church anymore because, we've been working through the COVID situation for the past year and a half, as everybody in our culture has been. So many of you are engaging online. Some of you have been here, but you've been here with a mask. And so it's hard to tell who's a part of the community and who's not. So one of the things we're doing are some summer hikes where these are opportunities for folks to get to know each other and just hang out in kind of a social outdoor setting. And so our next hike is June 26th, I believe. There's more details that are going to be coming out about that in the coming weeks, but we're doing one each month, so May, June, July, August. So just stay tuned and mark June 26th on your calendar and say, I'm going to go hiking with some Life Church folks that day. I do think we're planning on that one being a little bit more of a like we're going to hike up a mountain, I think, or something like that. The last one was a nice little easy walk on a dirt path that was pretty flat. So anyway, but more information will be out about that, and it'll be in the app. And then, one other thing, this Saturday, for those who are youth, we have our youth summer kickoff. And I know some of you are like, yay, I'm youth, but you're not, all right? You're young at heart, right? So 6th grade to 12th grade to seniors, this is who's invited this Saturday. We're having a hangout here, kind of a summer kickoff. It's going to be a lot of fun for the kids. And so 6:30 to 10, I think they're doing that. And it's going to be here out on our lawn. There's games, food, fun times. Am I right? I don't know so far. Yeah. So big screens, all that sort of stuff. And I know you're like, I would love more information about that to see if my kids want to come. Do you know where you can find it? In the app. That's right. Go to the app, Kids and Teens, click that thing. It'll take you to a page where there's a lot of information about that. So it's a great way to interact, great way for people to meet each other. And I know some of your kids are going, but I don't think I know anybody. I don't know if I want to go. Well, bring your friends. So then you have people with you that you already know and you can hang out with. All right? So it's going to be a good time. So just mark that in the calendar. Kids, youth, teens, those folks this Saturday. So that's all of the stuff that's happening here around Life Church. Again, we're glad that you're here. And in just a minute, I'm going to come back up and I'm going to do this whole message about God and the soul and nature. That's something I've been kind of excited about teaching through. But before we do that, Mary and Amy have a special number for us. So just sit back, listen to the words, enjoy this as they minister to us.
river God. Little stones are smooth. Only once the water passes through. So I am a stone, rough and grainy still, trying to reconcile this river's chill. But when I close my eyes and feel you rushing by, I know that time brings change, and change takes time. And when the sunset comes, my prayer would be this one, that you might pick me up and notice that I am just a little smoother in your hand. Sometimes raging wild, sometimes swollen high, but never have I known this river dry. The deepest part of you is where I want to stay and feel the sharpest edges wash away. And when I close my eyes and feel you rushing by, I know that time brings change, and change takes time. And when the sunset comes, my prayer would be just one, that you might pick me up and notice that I am just a little smoother in your hand. Rolling river God, little stones are smooth. Only once the water passes through.
That was fantastic. Hasidic Jews tell the story of a rabbi's son who began leaving the synagogue during morning prayers to wander off into the woods. The boy loved being alone in the forest, and his father was concerned, not simply because he was alone in the forest, but because the woods were a bit wild and dangerous in the Carpathian Mountains where they lived. And one day he asked his son, "Why do you go out into the forest alone? I've noticed you've been doing it a lot lately." And the boy replied, "I go into the woods to find God." The father said, "That's wonderful. I'm glad you're searching for God, but you know, you don't have to go anywhere special to find the Holy One. God is the same everywhere." "Yes," the boy answered, "but I'm not." God might be the same everywhere, but this boy knew that there was something different about him when he was out in the wilds, stripped of things that were familiar, He was more vulnerable, more open, and more receptive. Now today we are in this third part of the teaching series called Breathe, Learning to Care for the Soul. And as humans, I've been saying to us through this teaching series that we are more than simply flesh and blood creatures. We also have this immaterial part of us, which is often called the soul or the spirit. And these two are woven together, body and soul. They're kind of inseparable pieces of us. And philosophers, theologians, scientists have debated for millennia about what the soul is and how it works and how its relation to the body plays out. But for the sake of this series, we are simply accepting the reality of the soul, of the inner life, and acknowledging that it's an essential part of who we are as human beings, and it must be nurtured and cared for if we hope to live an abundant life in the world today. And so last week I discussed how silence and solitude help us care for our souls. I know you're like, oh, I'm going to hurry up and go listen to that message. I hope you are, because it was really helpful to me and maybe hopefully to you. But today I'm going to try to convince you that intentional engagement with nature is another significant way to care for your soul and to help you live your life to the fullest, right? And I know we're all in different places in our life and our journey and our capacity to be able to engage with nature, and we're not trying to shun or shame anybody in this regard. I think all of us will be able to take steps to move in this direction. But for thousands of years, human bodies have been living in existence within the natural world, right? Daily rhythms of sunrise and sunset, of rain and shine, and planting seasons and growing seasons and harvest seasons and wet seasons and dry seasons, the rhythms and the practices of nature. Our bodies have grown up within these things, and it's only since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s that humans began to be more thoroughly removed from our natural surroundings and removed from these natural rhythms and forces. In the early 1900s, as the Industrial Revolution was encroaching on the green spaces across England, and everyday woodlands and fields were being bulldozed to make space for factories, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were both bemoaning this destruction of the natural world. Now, Tolkien, who's, if you're not familiar, he's the author of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and many other works. Listen to something he said as he bemoaned this state of things. He says, "How real, how startlingly alive is a factory chimney compared with an elm tree? Poor obsolete thing, insubstantial dream of an escapist." Packs a lot of thought into a little phrase. And Tolkien's love of trees appeared often in his writings, and for those of you who know the Lord of the Rings, you might be familiar with the Ents, who were one of his representations of trees in the fictional work. And in the foreword to his book, Tree and Leaf, Tolkien bemoaned how a great-limbed poplar tree, which he could see while lying in his bed, was, quote, "suddenly lopped and mutilated by its owner. I do not know why," he says. "It is cut down now, a less barbarous punishment for any crimes it may have been accused of, such as being large and alive. I do not think it had any friends or any mourners except myself and a pair of owls." So Tolkien's close friend and author of the Chronicles of Narnia, C.S. Lewis, had similar sensations, similar opinions of these things, and he said this a week before his death in 1963. He said, "Near here they are about to demolish a lovely beechwood in order to straighten the main London road. Drat them. There are times when I wonder if the invention of the internal combustion engine was not even a greater disaster than that of the hydrogen bomb." Now, let me say this briefly here. That's a big statement. And C.S. Lewis was not one to say things he didn't mean. He was a very intellectually rigorous person and was very careful with his language. So that's a pretty profound statement coming from him. But then he explains more. He says this. He says, "Modern assumptions about progress that disregard the rhythms and the traditions of the past will come under attack. I care more about how humanity lives than how long. Progress for me means increasing the goodness and happiness of individual lives. For the species, as for each man, mere longevity seems to me a contemptible idea. I care more for how humanity lives than how long. Now, both of these authors are astute thinkers, and they saw the removal of human bodies from natural landscapes and settings as something that had unforeseen negative repercussions on our souls, and that such advancement could not too quickly simply be called progress. Something happens to us when we spend time in natural spaces, something that is good and true and real and life-giving. Just like the young boy in the Carpathian Mountains, God may be the same everywhere, but we are not. So today we live in air-conditioned homes, praise Jesus, and we work in offices and we drive in cars where the environment is controlled. We no longer go to bed when the sun goes down. We go to bed falling asleep on the couch while we're binging the latest Netflix show. We've removed ourselves from the very natural environment that our bodies were created to live within, the very environment where we just might experience God if we're aware of it. So this should be an obvious thing, but we rarely think about it, so I want to make clear that the story of Jesus, the scriptures, the story of God, Israel, all of these things, this whole package that we have in our biblical narrative, it's all housed within a room that is, and told, the story's told within a context of the natural world. Like these things happen embedded in the natural world, the stories that mean so much to us. In fact, the opening line of the entire scriptures goes like this. You might have heard it before. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Heavens, earth, darkness, deep waters, the Spirit of God. This is a story that's told about God and nature and the beauty of all of this stuff. And this story goes on. We could go after, we could highlight event after event. But the Israelites, they wander in the wilderness, right, for 40 years, learning all kinds of things from the natural environment of the wilderness. Moses talks with God on top of Mount Sinai and receives the 10 Commandments there on the top of the mountain. Many of the disciples of Jesus were fishermen. These are men who spent day after day on a boat in the Sea of the Galilee, dealing with darkness, dealing with storms, dealing with the elements, rather than being indoors in a religious institution. Jesus looked at a mustard seed, and he taught his followers a spiritual lesson. Jesus watched a farmer planting seeds in his field, and he teaches us a lesson about soil, and some things spring up, and some get taken by the birds, this lesson that people still wrestle with and ponder its meaning today. Jesus' most famous sermon is called the Sermon on the Right? Not the sermon in the church, right? The sermon in the building, that's the big sermon that Jesus did. No, it's the Sermon on the Mount because it was outside where the birds flew over and the lilies grew in the fields and the wind blew on the faces of the people as they listened. Something happens in nature that enhances our spiritual awareness if we allow it to happen, if we're aware of it, if we embrace it. God may be the same everywhere, but we are not. In fact, the very last night of Jesus' life on earth, the scriptures tell us this little piece of the story. It says this in Luke chapter 22. It says, "Then, accompanied by the disciples, Jesus left the upstairs room, and he went as usual to the Mount of Olives. And there he told them, 'Pray that you will not go into temptation.' And he walked away about a stone's throw, and then he knelt down and prayed." You may be familiar with this story. It's a big part of what we read about at the Easter story. This is just before the crucifixion. Jesus is praised for, let this cup pass from me in the Garden of Gethsemane. But it's interesting that they had a religious event. They celebrated the Passover meal in the upper room, and then they leave the room. So rooms aren't bad. You're like, hey, are rooms bad? Rooms aren't bad, right? But sometimes we got to get out of the rooms and get into nature. And so it says that Jesus left the upstairs room, and it says he went as usual to the Mount of Olives. Now, the Mount of Olives, when he's in the room, he's in Jerusalem, and they leave that Jerusalem and they run down into the Kidron Valley. It was right next to Jerusalem. And then up on the other side is a mount called the Mount of Olives. And on the side of that mountain is the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is where Jesus prayed. And the Garden of Gethsemane is not technically a garden as we think of a garden today. Most scholars would say it was actually more like an orchard. It's an orchard full of trees. And Jesus usually went there to pray. It's right next door to the city of Jerusalem. Guess what's also in the city of Jerusalem? The temple. Jesus, why aren't you going to the temple to pray? Well, he did that. Sometimes he went to the temple and he taught, but it was his custom to go into the orchard on the side of the mountain to pray. Because something about that context did something for Jesus and his connection with God. So as we think about the soul and nature today, I want to explore two ways that nature can help the soul. I want us to think about two different things. Two ways when we experience nature, what happens in us. And so the first thing I want to tell you about is this, that experience in nature fosters connection. Experience in nature can foster connection. Now, there's something about going out into nature that helps us experience connection in very real and tangible ways. And when I say connection, I'm talking about connection with God, I'm talking about connection with ourselves, connection with others, and connection with creation itself. Nature fosters, being in nature, experiencing nature, fosters this connection. Earlier this spring, I had the urge to get out and do some exploring, and some of you may know I like to get out along the Susquehanna River. There's a few places around the river I'm exploring and just getting to know that wonderful river that we have right next door that after living here for 10 years, I hardly ever even thought about it. And so finally, I'm getting to know this river. And so I went to this section that I was exploring, that I wanted to explore, that I hadn't been to before. And as I ventured around this area, it was early spring, there was just, buds were starting to push on the branches and some weeds were starting to grow. The dead of winter was passing and new life was just beginning to spring. But that allowed me to be able to see the terrain really, really well. And as I walked along and explored this area, I was heartbroken because it felt like a garbage dump. I don't know if you've seen this along the river, but there were enormous amounts of trash that were just strewn across the banks of the river. And this was relatively remote. It's not like there were all kinds of houses and all kinds of stuff happening right along this side. But it was plastic jugs of antifreeze. There were Gatorade bottles. There were tires upon tires. There were flip-flops. There were straws and Starbucks cups. And there were plastic bags and pieces of styrofoam, entire docks that had been washed away and brought down the river just mashed up against a tree. And there was all of this debris. I was heartbroken as I was walking around. I was like, I tried to pick up a few things, and I'm like, this is a never-ending task. Here on this millennia-old riverbank, it felt like a garbage dump, and I realized quickly how connected we are, and how our actions have a rippling effect out into the natural world. Seeing it sensitized me a bit to it. I felt the connection. And actually, if you're interested, if this kind of stirs you a little bit, there's an Instagram account by a gentleman who, it's called Susquehanna Plastic Picking 1000. I don't know what the 1000 is, but Susquehanna. And he weekly takes a little boat out into the Susquehanna and gathers garbage and collects it and throws it in a dumpster. He does this sort of southern end of Lancaster County, York area on the river. So you can follow him and take up that cause too if you'd like. But experience in nature fosters connection, and some of it's connection with nature, and we see how we're connected to one another. Now, in the song that Mary and Amy just sang for us and played for us, the River God, in that song, we also see this idea of connection coming through. Here's how some of the lyrics went in the song. Rolling river God, little stones are smooth, only once the water passes through. So I am a stone, rough and grainy still, trying to reconcile this river's chill. But when I close my eyes and feel you rushing by, I know that time brings change and change takes time. And when the sunset comes, my prayer will be this one, that you might pick me up and notice that I am just a little smoother in your hands. God is like the river. We are like the stones, becoming more and more smooth as we close our eyes and feel him rushing by. The natural world is a place where we can feel the connection of all things, and where we can feel a connection to the maker of all things. Now, I often reference, and I'll reference a few more times, the author Belden Lane. He's a writer on spirituality and nature. And he makes this statement in his book, Backpacking with the Saints. He says this: "What I seek most in going into wilderness is not exercise or escape, but a physical and spiritual depth of intimacy and beauty. But what sets me afire is the longing I sense there of everything else wanting to connect, the desire for an intimacy that is as alluring as it is frightening." And he goes on, he says, I go to spend time alone with God in a robust and full-bodied way. The two of us marvel at fresh deer tracks in the mud and black clouds looming over the ridge. We revel in the wilderness and grieve over what isn't wild enough. We argue over the bloody business of insects devouring each other. We fall in love all over again. We connect. This is the power of nature on the soul, because nature fosters connection. Now, another thing I wanted to think about this morning with you all is the fact that experience in nature can foster enchantment. Okay? Can foster enchantment. Now, hang with me here on this word. This maybe is a word that you're not used to hearing in church, but let me talk this through a little, and then maybe you'll understand, hopefully, what I'm saying. It's always the goal of a preacher, right? To say some things and people actually understand what you're saying. Anyway, I get that about 25% of the time, I think. So, anyway, experience in nature fosters enchantment. So I am a supporter of scientific advancement. I believe science and faith don't have to be at war with each other, that these two things should be in conversation with each other, learning from one another. And I'm amazed daily at what we've figured out how to do as a species through our scientific, advancement. And we put people on the moon, we put a rover on Mars, we're doing incredible things. We can mess with DNA, we can cut the DNA and change it. What we can do is absolutely amazing, and I welcome it. I welcome that. I'm not knocking it. But there also is a massive downside to a purely scientific worldview. And that's a scientific worldview is when we quickly remove the downside is that we quickly remove the mystery, the wonder, the magic, the enchantment, and the sacredness of life. When matters just matter, just molecules bumping into each other, there's nothing more. See, when we have that sort of purely scientific worldview, I actually think humans don't do well. For example, in a materialistic worldview, lightning is no longer something that's full of mystery and power. Instead, we got a scientific explanation for it, right? It's about raindrops and friction and negatively charged ions and the arc of the electricity breaking, snapping at one point, and so we have this explanation for it. And we've also not only we have an explanation for it, we've learned how to harness it, and so we've learned how to harness the power of electricity so we can have microwave ovens and toasters. And I'm glad that we have toasters, right? But we also need lightning to be a source of wonder and awe and enchantment in the natural world. We need to be able to step back and go, I know how that works, scientifically speaking, and yet it is amazing to me. So in his recent book, Hunting Magic Eels, Rediscovering an Enchanted Faith in a Skeptical Age, the author and psychologist Richard Beck discusses this dynamic at length. And I would encourage you, this is a really good book. It's relatively new out. Hunting Magic Eels, super, super good if you're thinking about these kind of things. But he discusses this dynamic of enchantment and science and all of this. This is what he says. He says, 500 years ago, life was enchanted. But with the Protestant Reformation and the beginning of the Enlightenment, the world, in the West at least, has grown increasingly disenchanted. We live in a world dominated by science and technology. Increasing numbers of us don't believe in God anymore, and we don't expect miracles. He goes on to say, rates of agnosticism and atheism in the United States have been steadily increasing, and especially among younger college-educated individuals. This rising tide of disenchantment has profoundly affected our religious imaginations. We've lost our capacity for enchantment and our ability to see and experience God as a living, vital presence in our lives. So Beck uses this term, enchantment, as a way to move us beyond a simply scientific worldview. He describes it as our ability to see and experience God as a living and vital presence in our lives. Like, is God here? Is God in around us? Is God dwelling in all things? Or is it just science? Is it just molecules? Is it just matter? Are we just here alone? So this is his way of saying that there's something more to this world than matter. Right? There's an enchantment. There's a spiritualness. There's God present in all things. But our ever-growing materialistic and secular worldview says that matter is all there is. Spirit, soul, God can become bygone fairy tales of a bygone era. And that's creating a disenchanted population who are left with a gaping hole in their souls where God is supposed to be. And maybe you felt that in your own life at times. The scientific encroachment, like, well, there's something you used to think was mysterious or wonderful or glorious. All of a sudden, well, there's a scientific answer for that, and now the glory is gone. The wonder is gone. Now, Beck, he describes this gaping hole as the ache, is a phrase he coined, the ache. He says there's an ache in us that's aching for this sort of more enchanted view of reality, this sense that sees the spiritual. He says this, he says, God may be dead, but we sure do miss him. The ache is the chalk outline around God's dead body, marking the space that God once occupied in our lives. Again, this is, people have said, philosophers have said God is dead. Part of this is like, we don't need God anymore. It's this whole philosophical argument. Like, the world runs, the world happens, we don't need God, he's not involved in it. Like, we've pushed God out through our scientific advancement. So God is, quote unquote, dead. But then he says this, he says, when we trace this outline of God's body, this chalk outline, the words we usually use are anxiety, depression, suicide, addiction, loneliness, meaninglessness, cynicism, hopelessness, irritation, angst, malaise, and boredom. This is what it feels like when God is dead. When creation is no longer alive with the presence of God. I think this deep skepticism of our modern culture is only made possible because too many of us have been disconnected from the natural world and its powerful effects on our lives. Even the most skeptical, cynical, and secular of people, after spending 3 or 4 or 5 days in nature, begin to experience the enchantment that comes along with nature. There's something powerful that happens in these wilderness settings. I was listening to an Audible podcast called The 3-Day Effect. And it's this series of episodes where they're simply talking about the power, and actually what's interesting is they use scientific measurement to measure sort of their findings, but the power of being in nature for 3 days. And so they walk through, each episode is a different group of people who end up in a natural setting for 3 days, and they measure like their certain hormone levels, their stress levels, all this stuff beforehand, and then they measure things afterwards. And there is a profound difference in their psyche, in their levels of anxiety, and their levels of stress after being in nature for 3 days. And these are, one of the stories is interesting because it's a guy from New York City who's like super skeptical, super secular, super like, just opinionated, and he's like, thinks this is a stupid thing to do, but he does it anyway, and he goes and he does this, and by the end of it, like he's like a totally different person at the end of it. Even this sort of atheistic, skeptical, secular person is saying, wow, something else is going on here. There's an enchantment. So humans have been experiencing this for millennia, and as a result, certain natural places actually begin to have a powerful effect on people. And these natural places often become sacred places. Right? You can't stand at the foot of the Rocky Mountains and not be moved. You can't hike through the Grand Canyon and not sense something in your spirit. You can't stand on a mountain peak with a breathtaking view and not have your soul stirred and feel like there's got to be more to this world, or feel like something sacred is happening. Now, again, in the book, Hunting Magic Eels, Richard Beck, he tells a story about how he went to San Francisco, and when he went to San Francisco, he had friends who were like, "Oh, you can't come to San Francisco without going to see the Redwood Forest. You got to go see, experience this, because it's life-changing." And Beck says, he responds, he says, "And it was." He says, "It's not just the size of the trees and how wide the trunks are and how they soar into the sky, it's also their age. Our hands ran across the bark of redwoods older than the United States. It was like walking through a cathedral created by the hand of God." Then he says this, he says, "Even if you don't believe in God, it's hard not to feel the enchantment of a redwood forest. When matter is reduced to interchangeable building blocks, a lump of raw material, it becomes very easy to commodify and commercialize and to exploit it for our own purposes." This is a powerful statement. He says, disenchant a redwood forest, strip it of its sacred magic, and you've got yourself a great source of lumber. Something to think about there. Sometimes I think we purposefully disenchant things, don't see them as sacred, don't see the sacred beauty that God has infused them with, because what we need is a pile of lumber. So we chop it down. So experience in nature fosters connection. That's my first point. And an experience in nature can foster an enchantment. By, again, enchantment, I'm not, we're playing with words here a little bit. This is a way in which God speaks to us, a way in which we experience God, a way in which we feel and sense that there's something more happening. And humans need both of these things, connection and enchantment, a lot. We need these things very badly. So a bottom line for us today is just this, that when we place our bodies in nature, our souls can experience God in new and life-giving ways. When we take our bodies and we place them in nature, certain natural settings, our souls can experience God in new and powerful ways, in life-giving ways. So I want to encourage you this week to ask yourself a couple of questions. First is this: what natural landscapes are you drawn to, and how can you spend more time there? And see what happens, right? What natural landscapes are you drawn to? Because at the end of the day, this is a unique thing, unique story. Like, one of us is drawn to this, one of us is drawn to that. Like, lean into that, whatever it might be. What natural landscapes are you drawn to, and then ask yourself, how can I spend more time there? Belden Lane, who I referenced earlier, he makes this comment. He says, "It seems that we often inadvertently arrive at the place we need most, one that mirrors our interior landscape, which we are trying to navigate." So oftentimes the external landscape, the natural landscape that you feel drawn to, you're drawn to that because it mirrors something else that's going on inside of you. And there's something to learn there. I know many of you know that a few years ago, my wife and I got to have a sabbatical here at Life Church, and as a part of that sabbatical, I spent 5 days in the mountains of Pennsylvania in a cabin by myself, sort of a silent solitude retreat. One of the days I got up and just decided I was going to walk, and so I just started walking down the road and then onto a trail and into the woods, and like, where am I going? I'm not sure. I'm just going to explore. And so I just meandered off into the woods with a backpack and a water bottle and a notebook, and I just kind of followed a path for a while and meandered through the woods until I finally came to this place where there was this lush valley, and the trees had kind of been cleared because what I found, there was a beaver dam in this little valley, and the ground was really soft and moist, and you had to kind of step over onto these grass islands to make your way through as the stream was kind of trickling through. And I got to this place right next to the beaver dam, and I sat down next to the beaver dam for a few hours and just journaled and thought and kind of just thought about life and tried to work out my junk, as I was sitting there by the beaver dam. But what ended up happening is somehow or another that landscape is what my soul needed, because as I explored that in the months and months to come, as I wrestled with the things I was writing, the things I was wrestling with, I began to realize that I had so much dammed up in me. And partly why I think I've been so drawn to the river these past year too, is It's connected, right? The river is free and flowing. So beaver dams and rivers have been part of my journey over the past 2 years, and I think that's important. That matters. We're drawn to the places that mirror what's happening inside of us or what our souls are longing for. So, what natural landscapes are you drawn to? And how can you get in those spaces more often? Is it a forest, a beach, a mountaintop, a stream, a river? What is it? Maybe there's a specific tree in a park near your home. You're like, I live in the city. Like, this is really hard. Like, there are parks, which is really good that we have parks. And actually, there's been studies done. People do better in cities when there are green spaces in the city. The more concrete, the less green, the higher the blood pressure, and all other kind of things. Research has been bearing this out. So maybe there's a tree in a park across the street from your house, and maybe you just need to sit next to that tree every now and again. Maybe you can do it once a week for 10 to 20 minutes, or maybe you walk by it every day, and you can take 5 minutes to sit there. Or maybe you want to take a big trip and go away somewhere. Whatever it is, just take the step. Your soul needs you to experience God and nature. Because though God is present everywhere, we are not the same everywhere. And new things happen when we're in that context. So when we place our bodies in nature, our souls can experience God in new and life-giving ways. So let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you so much for this morning and for these things we're thinking about here. We have great admiration for the natural world that you have given to us. And you've asked us to be stewards of this world. And it's in this world that we have grown up as humans, that we continue to develop, continue to progress. So help us wrestle. We're not against progress. We like a lot of the things that science has brought to us. And yet there is a downside. And there are ways that we need to mitigate and ways that we still need to care for our souls and the ways in which nature can really only play that as we engage with you through nature. So help us be a church where we have a respect for the natural world and a respect for its impact on our lives, our communities. Help us see the connection of all things and help us experience the enchantment that ultimately you bring through your presence in this world. So thank you for this day. Thank you for this conversation. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
If you're so able, come on and stand on up for our final song, proclaiming that the earth is yours. And if you want to put your hands together, I'll lead you in that too.
Twisting, the forest sounds with cedars breaking.
All right. Thank you once again, band. Thank you for being here today with us in the room. Thank you for those of you who are joining us online out there. So glad that you're with us today. Hopefully this conversation was helpful to you. If you have questions about it, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll be hanging out here. If you're online, you can fill out that connection card and write your questions in there or send us an email. I'd be happy to follow up and talk about you with this. And so anyway, hopefully you take a moment sometime this week to think about what landscapes you might be drawn to and figure out how you might be able to engage in those landscapes in your own spiritual journey. So thanks for being here. Next week we finish up this teaching series thinking about technology and its impact on our souls. And so I hope you can come on back for that. And I think next week we have kids programming, right? Kids programming will happen next week. And remember, we got the youth thing going on this Saturday. So you get that app and pay attention to what's going on around here. We got some good stuff going on. So it's good to see you. Thanks for being here today. And until next time, Godspeed.